At 5:18 a.m., USS Stockdale is already inside the escort lane when the tanker ahead of her drifts half a degree off track and the water under both hulls starts answering back. There is almost no room to maneuver in the eastern Strait of Hormuz, not with shallow water below, commercial traffic around them, and a narrow lane that has only been judged safe enough to risk, not safe enough to trust. What the bridge team does not understand yet is that the minefield under the lane is not waiting for the tanker, it is waiting for Stockdale. If you enjoy high-tension naval warfare stories like this, subscribe now, because this one only gets worse from here. The first sign is too small to scare anyone. It is not a wake, not a radar contact, not a surface flash from the Iranian coast. It is a pulse, weak, rhythmic, buried beneath the low mechanical wash of two large ships trying to move in disciplined spacing through one of the most dangerous waterways on Earth. Inside Combat Information Center, sonar technician first class Naomi Velez leans over the undersea display and listens to the contact repeat. 14 seconds between each return. Too even to be biology. Too faint to be propulsion. Too regular to be dismissed once it repeats a third time. The data is already on her screen. The pattern is already in her head. She has heard it before. To understand why that matters, you need to understand what naval mines actually do in a place like Hormuz. Mines are not dramatic weapons. They do not chase. They do not announce. They wait. That is exactly why they remain effective against navies with far more expensive ships and far more sophisticated sensors. A missile has to find you. A submarine has to maneuver toward you. A mine only has to be where you are forced to pass. That is what makes the Strait of Hormuz dangerous. It compresses movement. The waterway narrows global traffic into predictable lanes. Deep draft tankers cannot improvise much without risking grounding or collision. Escorts have to protect those tankers without pushing them into worse water. Heavy commercial traffic creates constant acoustic clutter. Seabed contours distort returns. A few mines placed in the right geometry can freeze entire shipping patterns. Not because every ship gets hit, but because no one can be certain which ship is next. Iran has spent years building exactly that kind of pressure. Fast boats for distraction, coastal missiles for intimidation, small submarines for uncertainty, mines for denial, not a fleet battle, a layered chokehold. Most mines are simple in concept even when they are hard to detect. A contact mine waits to be struck. A moored mine holds position at depth. A bottom mine sits on the seabed and listens. Influence mines go further. They read pressure, magnetics, or acoustics. They are not looking for any target. They are looking for the right target. That difference changes everything. A dumb minefield threatens everyone. A selective minefield threatens the ship the enemy most wants dead. The escort lane in front of Stockdale has already been assessed as usable under controlled transit. That phrase sounds comforting until you understand what it really means. It does not mean clean. It means someone believes the risk is low enough to take under pressure. In a place like this, those are not the same thing. This lane is not designed to stop every hull that passes through it. Fishing craft, small commercial traffic, irregular local movement. Those can pass without incident. But one influence mine tucked in the right seam of the lane can be tuned to wait for a larger propulsion signature, a steadier shaft rhythm, a deeper acoustic footprint. A destroyer escorting a tanker is almost ideal. Large enough to trigger, predictable enough to profile, constrained enough to trap. That is the real geometry of the problem by 5:18 a.m. Stockdale is not just escorting through danger. She is completing it. Naomi Velez is not senior enough to own the room. She is not a department head. She is not the captain's voice in combat. She is a specialist at an undersea warfare console aboard an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, one of the sailors who lives close to the raw picture before it becomes a recommendation, then a decision, then an order. That matters now because she has been watching this exact piece of water for days. During earlier transit reviews, she notices something odd buried under merchant noise recordings from the same corridor. A low pulse repeating every 14 seconds, not every few seconds. Not drifting with shipping density, not aligning with biologics, not matching prop wash or seabed echo. It grows stronger when a larger naval propulsion profile passes nearby and almost disappears beneath lighter civilian signatures. She does what good operators do. She writes it down. One page. Clean comparison notes. Time marks. Frequency behavior. Correlation with heavier hull signatures. A short conclusion. Possible fixed acoustic device or influence trigger nested in the transit lane, likely masked by merchant noise and only fully visible against naval harmonics. It never becomes a briefing priority. The note is acknowledged, logged, and folded into the long graveyard of observations that are interesting until something more urgent arrives. The working explanation is simple. Environmental interference, cavitation noise, seabed reflection, nothing actionable, not enough confidence, too many variables. The lane remains usable. Naomi keeps tracking it anyway, because random noise does not keep perfect time. Real clutter wanders. It drifts with sea state, traffic, shaft load, bottom conditions. This does not wander. It repeats. Now it is back. At 5:21 a.m., she flags the pulse to the tactical action officer for the second time in 7 minutes. Pulse repeated. Confirmed source. Low in the lane. Could be reflection. Not this clean. The words are short because the time is starting to compress. Above them, dawn light is climbing over a sea lane that looks ordinary enough to kill people. The tanker ahead holds course, heavy and vulnerable, its draft committing it to the center of the lane. Stockdale sits behind and slightly offset, where an escort destroyer is supposed to be, close enough to shield, far enough to react. Her Aegis suite is alive to every air and surface threat that might exploit the transit. The spy picture is clean enough. Surface contacts remain manageable. There is no missile launch, no swarm of fast boats tearing in from the coastline, nothing dramatic on the horizon. That is what makes this dangerous. The obvious attack never comes. At 5:22 a.m., the bridge orders minor course discipline to keep the tanker centered after the half-degree drift. No aggressive maneuver, no sudden correction, just a controlled adjustment to preserve spacing. It is the right decision for a visible threat environment. Underneath the water, it is exactly what the hidden threat wants. The pulse returns again, 14 seconds. Then again. Naomi looks at the timing against shaft rhythm and says it before the room is ready to hear it. It's tracking us. No one answers immediately, because that statement is worse than a simple mine warning. A mine ahead can be avoided. A mine under your acoustic profile can be triggered by the way you move. At 5:23 a.m., a suspicious mark appears low along the seabed picture and fades before it can be classified. It could be a tether shadow, a bottom protrusion, a moored object, or the edge of something built to disappear once you search too directly for it. The operations team leans forward, then away, then back again, as the track dissolves into clutter. The convoy cannot stop safely. A stopped tanker in Hormuz is a target. A stopped destroyer behind it is a fixed point in mined water. Stockdale cannot overtake without breaking the lane. She cannot swing wide without risking uncleared seabed. The captain knows all of that at once. Every option costs something. At 5:24 a.m., Stockdale slows slightly to maintain spacing. The pulse sharpens instantly. That is the first truly bad moment, because it confirms the pattern is not tied to the tanker. It is tied to the destroyer's own propulsion behavior, not the tanker, Naomi says. Say again. It's not keyed to her. Now the picture changes. The first response comes fast and makes sense. An MH-60R helicopter lifts to widen the search, looking for mine-laying signs, floating devices, unusual skiffs, any surface clue that can explain what the sonar team is hearing. SIC tightens acoustic classification. Bridge and combat pace their decisions together. The captain weighs breaking formation, but a destroyer darting out of position while escorting a civilian tanker can make the transit more dangerous, not less. He holds for more data. Time matters now, even if no one is yet using the word countdown. Every steady interval gives the acoustic device another clean read. Every clean read brings it closer to acceptance. That is how this kind of trap works. Not through speed, through certainty. The first defensive failure arrives because the team looks where a normal minefield should be. If there is a trigger, then there must be a cluster ahead. That assumption drives attention forward along the tanker's projected track. Sonar classification, watch rotation, and helicopter search all bias toward the water in front of the convoy. It is a professional assumption. It is also wrong. The most dangerous mine is not waiting ahead like a barrier. It is offset under Stockdale's own transit path, placed where an escort ship naturally settles while protecting the civilian hull in front of it. The geometry is not built to stop movement. It is built to shape it. The second failure comes from a correction that is tactically reasonable and acoustically disastrous. To preserve the tanker's centered line through the lane, Stockdale adjusts slightly to cover the tanker's outer flank. It is a careful move, small enough to avoid panic, small enough to preserve the escort picture, small enough to move the destroyer directly into the strongest part of the trigger envelope. Naomi catches it almost immediately. Pulse amplitude rising. Cause? Us? That answer finally lands with weight. At 5:26 a.m., the destroyer's undersea warfare team begins to understand that the lane is behavior-shaped. The ship is not just moving through danger, it is performing the exact profile the danger requires. Stable speed, predictable spacing, repeated acoustic harmonics, enough deep machinery to tell the influence logic beneath the keel that the correct target is overhead. The helicopter crew reports a suspicious object near the edge of the lane. Small, floating, unusual shape, possibly mine-related. The crew banks for a better look. Camera slant range tightens. Everyone wants it to be the answer because visible answers can be attacked. It is decoy debris. That is the third failure, and it hurts most because it wastes the last clean block of time before crisis. A floating element has been left where it can attract visual confirmation and reinforce the false assumption of a conventional mine cluster. Meanwhile, the real weapon remains where it always needed to be, unseen, patient, and listening. At 5:27 a.m., Naomi stops arguing around the pattern and goes directly at it. 14 seconds. Constant. So what? It's not listening. It's counting. That line changes the room. An acoustic trigger can be passive. It can wait for a threshold. But this one is doing more than listening for noise. It is cycling toward final acceptance. Every 14-second pulse is another check against Stockdale's hull, shaft, and propeller signature. The mine is not simply detecting a ship. It is confirming the right ship. The captain does not need a long explanation now. How long? Naomi looks down at the pulse spacing, the shaft behavior, the sharpened signal beneath their slowed escort profile, and gives the ugliest honest answer she can. Minutes, maybe less. At 5:28 a.m., the destroyer is still moving, the tanker is still committed, and the ship has reached the point where standard responses begin to run out. A dramatic turn could throw the tanker into worse water. A hard acceleration could collapse spacing and create collision risk. A stop is impossible. A blind attack into the water under the escort lane risks detonating the wrong thing at the wrong moment. This is where people get killed by choosing between bad options too late. But the fight wasn't over, because the first mine was not the whole trap. The real danger was that the lane had been built to force Stockdale into triggering it herself. That is the hidden logic Naomi finally puts into words. The device below them is not reacting to random presence. It is waiting for acoustic consistency. It wants the destroyer at steady shaft rhythm long enough to complete the trigger sequence. If the escort profile changes the wrong way, the mine confirms. If the profile breaks at the right moment, the mine loses the ship it thinks it has. Now the clue from the hook becomes the answer. 14 seconds. Not noise, not echo, a cycle. Naomi has been charting those intervals in her head since the first return. She has also been watching what makes the pulse strongest. Every time Stockdale settles into a clean escort speed, the pulse hardens. Every time machinery load shifts slightly, it softens. The mine is learning a pattern. That means the ship can give it the wrong one. At 5:29 a.m., she tells the Tau exactly what they have missed. It needs a steady signature. Fix? Deny consistency. The solution is not dramatic. That is why it works. No wild evasive turn. No desperate sprint. No panicked break in formation. Instead, Stockdale shifts into irregular engine modulation, a deliberate, controlled non-pattern in shaft rhythm. Tiny changes, enough to break harmonic consistency without losing convoy control. The tanker receives a 2-degree lane adjustment to preserve distance from the destroyer's altered offset. The helm keeps the move smooth. Engineering changes speed in careful increments that feel unnatural on purpose. Stockdale stops sounding like one stable target and begins sounding like a machine that refuses to repeat itself. At the same time, the ship deploys an acoustic distraction profile to the threatened side of the lane. Not a theatrical miracle, just another sound source, placed and timed to look clean enough for a machine that is already halfway convinced. The helicopter supports from above, marking the danger area and keeping the lane picture clear, while the destroyer runs the riskiest piece of seamanship in the transit. The pulse returns. 14 seconds. Weaker, then stronger again, then weaker. The room is not relaxed. This is the worst kind of tactical work. Watching a hidden logic you cannot see decide whether you fooled it or fed it. Pulse unstable. Keep modulation. Helm. Maintain offset. Eye. At 5:30 a.m., the mine commits. No one sees the weapon itself. What they see is the water. A hard white column erupts off Stockdale's quarter, towering up from below as the underwater detonation goes early and off-axis against the false acoustic window. Shock slams through the hull like a giant fist. Spray drives across the weather decks. The destroyer shudders from stern to bow. Alarms flash. Men and women grab console edges and bulkheads. Above the escort lane, the tanker disappears behind a rising sheet of water and shattered foam. For one violent second, the entire ship feels lighter and heavier at the same time. Then the hull answers back. No catastrophic rupture. No direct under-keel break. No flooding cascade. The blast has come close enough to punish, not close enough to kill. The mine takes the wrong sound and detonates in the wrong place. That is the near miss. Seconds later, or one steadier engine profile, and Stockdale dies under her own escort pattern. Instead, she is still moving. Damage report, shock effects only. Propulsion responding, hull intact. Now the fight changes. Survival is no longer the objective. Attribution is. A signature-tuned mine does not appear by accident in exactly the right seam of the lane. Someone had to place it. More importantly, someone had to calibrate or verify the signature logic in the same corridor. That means there is a support node somewhere nearby, a disguised skiff, a calibration craft, a minilayer fragment, something small enough to blend into the clutter and close enough to observe. The helicopter crew already has pieces of that picture. An unremarkable small vessel near the lane edge. Low profile, poorly matched movement. Too interested in the convoy, not interested enough in survival. When the detonation goes off axis and Stockdale keeps moving, the craft turns away at once. That is all the destroyer needs. At 5:32 a.m., the MH-60R tightens its orbit and hands back a cleaner surface track. The craft is disguised like local traffic, but behaving like a military support node. It is moving for a secondary point near the mine seam, likely to scuttle gear, cut evidence loose, or seed another influence device under the confusion of the blast. Stockdale's combat team does not overcomplicate the response. The helicopter marks the target. The destroyer aligns. There is no speech about escalation, no dramatic warning beyond what procedure demands. Hostile pattern, immediate threat, engage. At 5:34 a.m., the first strike lands. A short, controlled burst tears across the water in front of the fleeing craft and forces it into a sharper turn toward the lane edge. That turn exposes exactly what it has been trying to shield: mine-handling gear, compact deployment rails, and what looks like a recording mast or verification package used to monitor passing signatures. That is enough. The second engagement is colder. The helicopter attacks first, precise and low, crippling the craft before it can dump or arm anything else. Seconds later, Stockdale's own follow-up fire turns the staging node into burning fragments and foam. The secondary mine point near the lane edge is neutralized immediately after, before the lane can be reseeded. It is not cinematic from the ship's point of view. It is procedural, efficient, necessary. By 5:38 a.m., the escort lane has changed from a transit problem into a controlled damage picture. The tanker remains intact. Stockdale carries shock damage, minor equipment casualties, and one story every sailor aboard will remember the next time someone says a lane is probably safe. The destroyer is still combat capable. The convoy moves. The deeper lesson takes longer to settle. By 6:02 a.m., the immediate action cycle is over, and the ship is back in the colder language navies use when they have survived something they were not expected to survive. Checks, restorations, reports, cross-deck coordination, follow-on warnings to every ship that will use that water after them. One active acoustic mine defeated by disruption rather than impact. One enemy staging craft destroyed. One tanker escorted through the kill zone alive. One destroyer still afloat because it stopped sounding predictable at exactly the right moment. No fatalities. No direct hull breach. And one transit lane reclassified for what it really is. Not cleared, not safe, but selectively trapped. Naomi Velez does not become the face of anything. She stays where she has been all along, in a room full of equipment that only matters when someone can interpret it before the ship runs out of time. Her earlier note, the one that never moved past internal review, is no longer an interesting anomaly in a file. It is now the baseline for the next ship that enters the strait. That is the kind of victory naval warfare produces in confined water. Not fireworks, not speeches. A ship survives. Another ship keeps moving. A hidden tactic gets exposed before it can be repeated. The operator who noticed the pattern goes back to work. Iran builds this trap around silence, timing, and the assumption that a modern destroyer will trust a controlled lane more than a faint anomaly in the noise. That logic is not foolish. It is disciplined. It almost works. It fails because one sonar technician refuses to believe that randomness can keep perfect time. That is the cold truth underneath the whole engagement. The mine does not hate the ship. It does not even know the ship the way people know enemies. It waits for recognition, for rhythm, for the exact acoustic fingerprint it has been trained to accept. The escort survives because Naomi hears that recognition process early and understands what the rest of the combat team is hearing too late. In the end, no missile saves us Stockdale. No long-range interceptor wins the day. No sweeping last-minute miracle arrives from outside the lane. The ship survives because someone inside SIC realizes that the pulse under the hull is not background noise. It is the mind thinking. For more high-stakes naval warfare stories, subscribe and stay on station.